I brought my late wife's laptop to a repair shop on a Tuesday morning in late October, nearly 8 months after we buried her. It wasn't something I had planned to do. The laptop had been sitting on the corner of her desk in the spare bedroom since the night the paramedics came, and I had walked past it every single day without touching it. Her reading glasses were still folded beside it. A half-empty mug of chamomile tea had left a ring on the wooden surface that I couldn't bring myself to wipe away. I told myself I was preserving something. Honestly, I think I was just afraid. My son called. Had worked as a financial analyst for most of her career before she retired. And then, in what she called her second act, she had taken on contract work auditing the books for a handful of small non-profits and municipal housing programs in our region. She loved it. She said it kept her sharp. She said numbers never lied. Only the people presenting them did. She had a stroke on a Wednesday evening while I was cooking dinner downstairs. She was 61 years old. The doctors said it was sudden, that she likely felt nothing. I'm not sure I believe that, but I held on to it anyway, because some things you need to believe just to get through the morning. The laptop had a password I didn't know. That was the first thing that surprised me. Eleanor and I had shared everything. Bank accounts, a Gmail, the Netflix password she made me change every 3 months for reasons she never fully explained. But this laptop had its own login. And when I finally tried to open it that October, it asked for credentials I didn't have. So I brought it to a repair shop on Dunlop Street, a small place run by a man about 10 years younger than me. His name was Arthur. He had the careful, quiet manner of someone who had heard too many people's problems through their broken devices to be surprised by anything anymore. I explained that it was my late wife's computer. I explained that I just wanted to access some photographs, maybe some old documents, things she might have wanted me to have. I was not emotional about it, or I tried not to be. I had gotten good at describing Eleanor in the past tense without my voice breaking. The way you get good at anything you are forced to practice enough. Arthur nodded. He said he would take a look. He said to come back in 2 days. I came back in 2 days. He was standing at the front counter when I walked in, and the expression on his face stopped me before I reached the door. He was not panicked exactly, but he was careful. The kind of careful that meant he had been thinking about what to say. He told me to come to the back. We sat at a small table near a workbench covered in circuit boards and coil cable. He had a printout in front of him, just a single page, face down. He slid it toward me, but didn't flip it over yet. He said he had accessed the drive and found that most of the files were password protected within folders. He had not opened them, he was clear about that, but one folder had been left unlocked, and he had seen enough of its contents by accident to know that he needed to speak with me before he handed anything over. I told him to go ahead and tell me whatever he needed to tell me. He said, I think your wife was documenting something involving a lot of money, and I think you need to be very careful about who you tell. He flipped the page over. It was a screenshot Eleanor had taken and printed, apparently some time before she died. It showed a spreadsheet, column headers, a series of account numbers, dates going back almost 3 years. In the margin, in her handwriting, I recognized it the way you recognize someone's voice. She had written, follow the withdrawals, BH knows. I stared at that page for a long time. I asked Arthur what he thought it meant. He said he didn't know, but he said he had a cousin who worked in a government office, and that whatever this was, it looked like the kind of thing that got people into serious trouble. He said, take this home, don't tell anyone you have it, and think hard about who you can trust. I drove home on autopilot, the printout folded in my coat pocket, and I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. Eleanor had kept secrets from me. Or not secrets exactly. She had kept something from me. Something she had been carrying alone, and now she was gone. And whatever it was had been left behind on a hard drive in the spare bedroom, where her reading glasses were still folded beside a cold mug of tea. The first thing I did was go to her desk. Really go to it this time. I pulled open the drawers I had been avoiding for 8 months. She had been thorough. She had always been thorough. That was the thing about Eleanor. She was methodical in a way that I, a retired civil engineer, deeply admired and occasionally found exhausting. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of craft catalogs she'd been collecting for a pottery class she never got to take, there was a manila folder. Inside the folder were printed emails, bank statements with certain lines circled in red pen, and a handwritten timeline on yellow legal paper. She had been doing this for at least 2 years before she died. The initial BH appeared several times. So did the name of a housing development program I recognized. The Lakeview Commons Initiative, a federal and provincial co-funded affordable housing project that had been announced with considerable fanfare by our regional municipality about 4 years ago. I remembered Eleanor mentioning it at the dinner table. I remembered her saying the numbers felt off. I had asked her what she meant, and she had said, "I'm probably wrong. Let me look more carefully." And then she had looked more carefully for 2 years and never told me what she found. BH. I turned that over in my mind while I sat at her desk in the fading afternoon light. My brother-in-law's name was Bernard Hollis, Eleanor's younger brother, the one who had parlayed a mid-level position in municipal planning into something considerably more comfortable over the past decade. The one who had, at Eleanor's funeral, squeezed my shoulder and said he was sorry for my loss in the tone of a man reciting a line rather than meaning it. I sat with that realization for a long time. I am 63 years old. I spent 35 years as an engineer with the province of Ontario, and I understand contracts and procurement and the specific ways that infrastructure money can disappear between the government's hand and the ground it is supposed to build on. I am not naive, but I had never once considered that the money might have disappeared through Eleanor's own family. I needed to know what was on that laptop. I went back to Arthur and told him I needed to access the password-protected folders. He said he could try, but that it might take time. I told him I would wait. It took him 4 days. He called me on a Saturday morning and said quietly, "You should come in." There were hundreds of files. Eleanor had been meticulous. She had organized everything by date, by transaction, by name. She had built a case the way only someone with 30 years of financial analysis experience could build a case. Layer by layer, source by source, with nothing assumed and everything documented. What she had found was this: the Lakeview Commons Housing Fund, millions of dollars in federal and provincial money earmarked for affordable housing units in our region, had been systematically drained through a series of shell contracts awarded to companies with no physical address, no employees, not to wish me a happy holiday, not to wish me a happy holiday, not to paper trail. When you followed it the way Eleanor had followed it, led to a numbered company registered in Alberta that was in turn connected to a property management firm that my brother-in-law had a financial interest in. It was not subtle once you saw it. It was the kind of fraud that works not because it's clever, but because nobody looks closely enough, and nobody who should be looking has any incentive to start. Eleanor had been looking for 2 years, and she had never told me, because I believe this, I have to believe this. She was protecting me. She was trying to build something airtight before she brought it to anyone, including me. She was thorough to the end. I closed the laptop and sat in Arthur's back room for a while, not saying anything. He brought me a cup of coffee without being asked. I appreciated that more than I could say. Here is the part I had not anticipated. When I drove home that Saturday, my daughter's car was in the driveway. My daughter, I'll call her by what I always called her. My girl had been living in Kitchener with her husband since their wedding 6 years ago. She visited at Christmas, at Easter, at my birthday in August if work allowed. She did not drop by unannounced. She had never, in 6 years of living, 2.5 hours away, simply appeared in my driveway on a Saturday morning. I walked in and she was sitting at the kitchen table. Her husband was with her. He was a man I had never fully warmed to, which Eleanor had gently pointed out was mostly my problem. He worked in commercial real estate, which I mentioned not to be uncharitable, but because it becomes relevant. She told me she had been thinking about the estate, about the house, about whether it made sense for me to stay in a 4-bedroom home alone at my age, now that mom was gone. She was 34. She said at my age, about a 63-year-old man who ran 5 kilometers 3 times a week and had a full head of hair. I listened. I asked questions. I kept my voice neutral, the way Eleanor had taught me by example over 40 years of marriage. Her husband mentioned Pape casually, almost as a footnote, that a developer had expressed interest in the neighborhood. That properties like ours, the larger lots backing onto the creek, had been getting serious attention lately, that if we were ever inclined to sell, he had a contact who could make it very straightforward. I asked the name of the developer. He gave me the name of the property management firm I had read about 2 hours earlier on Eleanor's laptop. I excused myself. I said I needed to use the washroom. I stood in the bathroom off the hallway and looked at my own reflection in the mirror and thought about what Eleanor would tell me to do right now. She would tell me to think before I acted. She would tell me to be sure. She would tell me not to accuse anyone of anything I couldn't prove. And then she would put her hand on my arm and say, very quietly, that she had already done the proving. I came back to the kitchen. I told my daughter and her husband that I was not ready to think about selling the house, and that I appreciated their concern and that I would be in touch. They left an hour later. My daughter hugged me at the door. I held on longer than usual. Whatever she knew or didn't know, whatever her husband had told her or hadn't, she was still my daughter, and I still loved her. And I understood in that moment that this was going to be the hardest part of everything that came next. Over the following 3 weeks, I did what Eleanor would have done. I organized. I made copies of everything, physical copies, in a safety deposit box at the TD branch on Bayfield Street, and digital copies on 2 separate USB drives that I gave to 2 separate people I trusted, with instructions not to open them unless something happened to me. I printed the timeline Eleanor had built on the yellow legal paper and added my own notes in a different color of pen. I went through her files chronologically, the way you read a case file, and I made sure I understood every document before I moved to the next one. I also hired a lawyer, not a rehab state lawyer, not the fellow who had done a will. I needed someone who understood financial crime, who had dealt with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit, who knew the specific contours of federal fraud involving government funds. A friend from my years with the province gave me a name. The lawyer's name was Frances, and she was 50-something and direct in the way of someone who had seen enough nonsense to have no patience left for it. I liked her immediately. I brought her the files. I sat across from her at a long table in a boardroom on the 14th floor of an office building in downtown Badie, while she went through everything, page by page, without speaking. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Your wife built a very strong case." I said I knew. She said, "This goes to the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team, and depending on what they find when they pull the full audit trail, possibly to the Federal Public Prosecution Service." I said I understood. She said, "This is going to be public, and the people implicated are going to know it came from your wife's files." I said I understood that too. What followed was not fast, and I want to be honest about that, because I've heard too many stories where justice arrives neatly and quickly, and that is rarely how it actually works. The initial complaint took 6 weeks to process. The formal investigation took another 4 months. There were times I heard nothing, and I would call Frances, and she would tell me, patiently, that these things moved at the pace they moved. But they moved. The property management firm was audited. The numbered company in Alberta was traced. The shell contracts were unwound. A total of $4.7 million in funds from the Lakeview Commons housing program was found to have been diverted over a period of approximately 3 years. My brother-in-law was charged. He was not the only one. There were 2 others, a man who had worked in the municipal planning office and a woman who had been the nominal director of one of the shell companies. But he was the one I knew. He was the one who had stood at Eleanor's graveside and shaken my hand. I did not feel triumphant when I heard. I want to be clear about that. I felt a specific kind of tired that I don't have a better word for. Eleanor had spent 2 years gathering those files. She had carried that knowledge alone because she was careful and thorough, and because she loved her family and didn't want to destroy it prematurely. And then she had died before she could do anything with it. The fraud was stopped. The money, most of it, would be recovered and redirected toward the housing program it had been stolen from. Families on waiting lists for affordable units in our region would eventually benefit. But Eleanor did not get to see it. I think about that. My daughter came to see me the week after the charges were made public. She came alone this time. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where she and her husband had talked about selling my house, and she looked like she hadn't slept in several days. She told me she hadn't known. She told me her husband had mentioned the developer as a business contact, an opportunity, nothing more. She told me that when she realized what the connection was, what her husband had known and when he had known it, she had felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. I believed her. I know her face. I have known her face since the night she was born, and I know the difference between her lying face and her honest face, and what she showed me that afternoon was her honest face. We sat in the kitchen for a long time, the 2 of us, and at some point I made tea, and she cried, and I put my hand on her arm the way Eleanor used to put her hand on mine. Her marriage did not survive the year. That is a separate grief, one I will not say more about except that I was there for it, and I am still here. My son-in-law's connection to the fraud was investigated. He had not been a direct participant, but he had known more than was defensible, and the professional consequences to him were significant and deserved. There is one more thing I want to say. After the investigation concluded and the charges were laid, I went back to Eleanor's desk. I sat down in a chair, which still smelled faintly of the cedar sachet she kept in the drawer. I opened the laptop. The password now changed to something I chose myself, and I looked through her files one more time. Not for evidence, just to be with her. She had kept a separate folder, unlabeled, near the bottom of the drive structure. Inside it was a single document, a letter she had started and never finished, addressed to me. It began, "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this without worrying you." It was 4 paragraphs long. She explained in her careful and organized way what she had found, what she was planning to do, and why she had not yet told me. She said she wanted to be sure before she brought it to me, because she knew how I got when I was worried, and she didn't want me worried until there was something concrete to worry about and a plan to address it. The last line she had written, before she stopped, "I just need a little more time." I read it 4 times. I cried in a way I had not let myself cry since the funeral, and then I sat at her desk with her reading glasses and her tea mug and her drink stain on the wood, and I felt, for the first time since losing her, something that was not grief exactly. It was something closer to partnership. She had started this, and I had finished it. She had gathered the truth, and I had carried it forward. She had spent 2 years trying to protect people she would never meet, families waiting for homes that were being stolen from them. And she had done it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything she ever did. The Lakeview Commons development broke ground 18 months later. 240 affordable housing units. The project had been delayed, the costs audited, the contracts retendered through a fully transparent process. I drove past the site on a Thursday in April, on my way back from Francis's office. The frames were going up. It was raw lumber and mud and the sound of nail guns in the cold spring air. And it looked, from the road, like the beginning of something. Eleanor would have said, "The numbers don't lie. Only the people do." She was right about that. She was right about most things. I still haven't wiped the ring stain from her desk. I still think about the moment I sat in Arthur's back room with that cup of coffee he brought me without being asked, and what it felt like to understand, all at once, what my wife had been carrying alone for 2 years. Eleanor was not a dramatic person. She didn't make grand gestures. She kept her reading glasses folded beside her laptop and her chamomile tea in the same mug every evening. And when something bothered her, she didn't announce it. She went quiet and she went to work. That was who she was. And I think that's the thing I keep coming back to when I try to make sense of everything that happened. The outcomes in this story weren't random. They followed directly from the kind of people involved and the choices each of them made, day after day, when no one was watching. Bernard made his choices too. He used a position of public trust to redirect money meant for families who had nothing, people on waiting lists, people counting on those units, and he did it carefully and deliberately for 3 years. That kind of thing doesn't happen in a single moment of weakness. It requires a sustained decision to put your own gain above your integrity, over and over again, until the habit of it becomes ordinary. And the weight of those choices, every shell company, every false contract, every signature on a document that pointed nowhere real, that weight didn't disappear because he was careful. It accumulated. Eleanor found it. The truth was patient. What I've come to understand, living on the other side of all this, is that character is not something you declare. It's something you demonstrate in the private moments, the ones nobody else sees. Eleanor sat at her desk for 2 years, building a case she might never be able to use because she believed it was the right thing to do. She didn't know if it would ever matter. She just kept going. That kind of quiet persistence. The willingness to keep doing difficult, honest work even when it costs you something. Even when you're tired. Even when you're alone with it. That is not a small thing. I think it might be the most important thing. I was not always steady during the months after I found those files. There were nights I felt overwhelmed by what I was looking at, and mornings I wasn't sure I had the strength to see it through. What helped me was doing what Eleanor had done, taking the next small step, calling Francis, making another copy, reading one more document. I didn't need to solve everything at once. I just needed to not stop. My daughter and I are still finding our way back to each other. It is slow, and it is sometimes painful, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I think the foundation we're rebuilding is more honest than what we had before, because we're both being more careful now. Careful about what we owe each other and what it actually means to show up for someone. Honesty has a cost. It also has a return if you're patient enough to wait for it. The Lakeview Commons flames went up in the cold April air. And I drove past them, and I thought, Eleanor did this. Not loudly, not with her name on anything, just by being the kind of person who, when she found something wrong, didn't look away. That's the life I want to live. I'm still learning how.